Psalm 46. God is your refuge. Every storm breaks before reaching you. There are moments in life when stability feels like an illusion. The ground beneath your feet seems to shift without warning, familiar structures collapse, and the world you trusted no longer feels safe. In those moments, fear does not ask permission before entering your heart. It arrives suddenly, loudly, and relentlessly. Psalm 46 was written for such moments. It is not a poetic escape from reality, nor a denial of chaos. It is a declaration made in the very center of upheaval. Its power lies in the fact that it does not promise the absence of storms, but the presence of God within them. This psalm speaks to the human experience of instability in a way that transcends time. Nations rage, mountains shake, waters roar, and kingdoms fall. These images are not exaggerated metaphors. They reflect the inner and outer realities of life. Personal crises, emotional collapse, spiritual warfare, societal unrest, and unseen pressures all converge to test the foundation of faith. Psalm 46 does not minimize these forces. Instead, it confronts them directly and proclaims a truth that defies natural logic. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. To call God a refuge is to say more than that he offers comfort. A refuge is a place of protection, a stronghold where external forces lose their power. It is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is designed to withstand attack. When Psalm 46 declares God as a refuge, it announces that no storm reaches you without first passing through his authority. The storm may roar, but it does not rule. The chaos may surround you, but it does not define you. This psalm teaches a deeper reality. Before fear can overwhelm you, before destruction can claim you, before collapse can consume you, the storm breaks. It fractures under divine sovereignty. What appears unstoppable in the natural realm meets resistance in the spiritual realm. This is not optimism, it is revelation. It is the unveiling of a spiritual order that governs the visible world. Throughout this reflection, we will explore how Psalm 46 reveals God's role as protector, stabilizer, and sovereign ruler over every form of chaos. Each topic will uncover a layer of truth that strengthens faith, silences fear, and restores inner stillness. This is not merely a study of Scripture. It is an invitation to stand firm when everything else shakes. The first words of Psalm 46 strike with unmistakable authority. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. This opening statement is not a conclusion drawn after reflection. It is a foundation laid before the storm unfolds. The psalmist begins with certainty, not speculation. He does not say God might be a refuge, or that God becomes a refuge once everything else fails. He declares that God already is. This distinction is critical. Refuge is not something God offers only in crisis. It is his nature in relation to those who trust him. To understand this truth fully, one must grasp what refuge truly means. In ancient times, a refuge was not symbolic. It was a literal place of survival. When armies advanced, people fled to fortified cities. When enemies pursued, individuals sought caves, strongholds, or walled towers. A refuge was the difference between life and death. It was designed to endure force, siege, and prolonged attack. By calling God a refuge, Psalm 46 places him in the role of ultimate defense, not a temporary shelter, but an unassailable stronghold. This immediately reframes how fear operates. Fear thrives on uncertainty. It feeds on the belief that danger is unchecked and that you are exposed. Psalm 46 dismantles this belief at its root. If God is your refuge, then exposure is an illusion. You may feel vulnerable, but you are not unprotected. You may feel surrounded, but you are not abandoned. The storm may approach, but it does not reach you without encountering divine resistance. The psalm continues by expanding this idea into an extraordinary statement. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. This is not poetic exaggeration meant to inspire calm feelings. It is a radical declaration of trust. The earth giving way represents the collapse of all that feels stable. Mountains falling symbolize the destruction of what appears immovable. In other words, even if the most reliable structures of life disintegrate, fear is not the final authority. This challenges a deeply ingrained human instinct. We tend to anchor our sense of safety in external structures, finances, relationships, health, routines, institutions, and plans. When these structures weaken, fear intensifies. Psalm 46 confronts this dependency by shifting the source of security from the external to the eternal. God is not merely stronger than collapsing systems, he is independent of them. When everything else fails, he remains unchanged. The phrase, "a very present help in trouble," carries profound meaning. It does not say God is distant, delayed, or conditional. Very present implies immediacy. It means God does not observe trouble from afar. He does not arrive after the damage is done. He is present within the moment of crisis itself. This presence is not passive. It is active, intentional, and authoritative. Many misunderstand divine help as intervention only at the breaking point. They assume God allows fear to escalate to unbearable levels before responding. Psalm 46 corrects this assumption. God's presence precedes collapse. His help operates before panic reaches its peak. This is why the storm breaks before reaching you. Not because the storm lacks power, but because God's presence limits its reach. This truth redefines the nature of spiritual protection. Protection does not always mean the absence of struggle. Often, it means the containment of destruction. The storm may still form, the winds may still rise, the waters may still roar, but there is a boundary they cannot cross. This boundary is not visible, yet it is absolute. It is established by divine authority. Throughout Scripture, this principle repeats itself. Forces of chaos advance, but they are restrained. Enemies pursue, but they are halted. Threats intensify, but they are neutralized before delivering their full impact. Psalm 46 encapsulates this spiritual law in a single declaration. God is our refuge. When he stands between you and the storm loses its final word. This understanding transforms how one experiences trials. Instead of interpreting adversity as evidence of abandonment, it becomes confirmation of divine governance. The presence of difficulty does not indicate the absence of God. On the contrary, his presence within difficulty ensures that the outcome is not destruction, but preservation. The psalmist's confidence does not arise from denial of danger. He openly acknowledges the most extreme scenarios imaginable. Earthquakes, collapsing mountains, roaring seas. These images reflect total disorder, yet his response is unwavering. Therefore, we will not fear. This fearlessness is not emotional numbness. It is spiritual alignment. It is the result of knowing who governs reality beyond what is visible. When fear is confronted by truth, it loses its grip. Fear depends on the belief that chaos is uncontested. Psalm 46 exposes chaos as limited. It reveals that every storm operates under constraint. There is an unseen authority that determines how far it can go. This authority does not negotiate with fear, it commands it. The refuge God provides is not merely a hiding place, it is a position of authority. To dwell in God as refuge is to stand within his rule. From this position, storms are no longer interpreted as ultimate threats, but as temporary disturbances. They may disrupt, but they do not destroy. They may challenge, but they do not conquer. This is why the psalmist can declare fearlessness before disaster occurs. He does not wait for the storm to pass to trust God. He trusts God before the storm reaches its peak. This proactive faith is the key to inner stability. It does not react to chaos, it rests above it. When you internalize this truth, anxiety begins to lose its power. Anxiety feeds on anticipation of loss. Psalm 46 interrupts this cycle by anchoring the heart in divine presence. If God is very present, then you are never facing tomorrow alone. If God is a refuge, then every threat must confront him before it confronts you. This does not mean life becomes effortless. It means fear no longer dictates your response. The storm may roar, but it does not define your identity. The chaos may intensify, but it does not determine your future. God's presence establishes a spiritual perimeter that transforms danger into testimony. Psalm 46 invites you into this reality. It does not promise a quiet world. It promises an unshakable refuge. It does not eliminate storms. It ensures they break before reaching your core. When fear whispers that collapse is inevitable, this psalm declares that God is already there, standing firm, unmoved, and in control. If this message is strengthening your faith and helping you understand God's protection more deeply, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you ensure that you continue receiving teachings that build spiritual resilience, restore peace, and anchor your heart in unshakable truth. Psalm 46 continues by shifting the focus from personal refuge to cosmic disturbance, revealing a truth that reshapes how believers understand chaos itself. After establishing that God is a refuge and a very present help, the psalmist does something unexpected. He allows the vision of disorder to expand. The waters roar and foam. Mountains tremble at their swelling. Nations rage and kingdoms totter. This is not a narrowing of danger, but an amplification of it. Yet instead of escalating fear, this widening scope exposes the true nature of chaos. It is loud, violent, and intimidating, but it is not sovereign. The roaring waters described in Psalm 46 represent more than physical floods. Throughout biblical language, waters symbolize instability, uncontrollable forces, and threats that overwhelm human capacity. When waters roar and foam, they signify moments when life feels out of control, when emotions surge, circumstances escalate, and solutions seem unreachable. These waters are unpredictable. They move with force. They destroy what stands in their path. Yet the psalmist does not describe being swept away by them. He describes them from a position of observation, not submersion. This perspective is critical. It suggests distance, containment, and oversight. The mountains trembling at the swelling of the waters further intensify the image. Mountains symbolize permanence, strength, and stability. When mountains shake, it suggests that even the most reliable structures of life are affected. Careers collapse, relationships fracture, health fails, identity structures crumble. What once felt immovable begins to waver. This is the stage where fear typically claims dominance. When both chaos and stability appear compromised, the human mind defaults to panic. Yet Psalm 46 does not end its description there. Instead, it introduces a powerful contrast. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. This single line changes everything. While chaotic waters roar outside, a controlled river flows within. While external forces surge violently, an internal current brings peace and joy. This river is not described as roaring or destructive. It is steady, intentional, and life-giving. It does not flood indiscriminately, it nourishes precisely. This contrast reveals a profound spiritual truth. Chaos may dominate the external environment, but peace flows internally where God dwells. The city of God represents the place of divine presence, order, and authority. The river flowing through it symbolizes God's sustaining power. Unlike the waters of chaos, this river does not overwhelm, it strengthens, it does not threaten, it restores. This imagery dismantles a common misconception that peace depends on the absence of chaos. Psalm 46 teaches the opposite. Peace depends on the presence of God. Chaos can exist simultaneously with divine order, but it cannot overtake it. The river within the city flows regardless of the storm outside. This is why the psalmist does not panic when mountains tremble. His confidence is not rooted in the stability of the world, but in the constancy of God's presence. The phrase, "God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved," reinforces this idea. The city does not remain stable because its walls are strong or its defenses are advanced. It remains unshaken because God Himself dwells within it. This is a radical shift in understanding security. Security is not achieved by eliminating threats, but by hosting presence. Where God is present, collapse is restrained. The timing of God's help is also emphasized. God will help her when morning dawns. Morning represents renewal, clarity, and divine intervention. Night symbolizes confusion, fear, and vulnerability. The psalm suggests that chaos often intensifies in the dark, when vision is limited and uncertainty grows. But dawn is inevitable. Light exposes what fear exaggerates. God's help arrives not randomly, but precisely when transition occurs. The night does not last forever. This introduces a critical principle. Chaos is temporary, but divine order is enduring. Storms operate in cycles. They rise, peak, and subside. God's presence, however, does not fluctuate. It remains constant before, during, and after the storm. This constancy ensures that chaos never achieves permanence. It may disrupt seasons, but it cannot define destiny. The psalmist then expands the scope again, moving from natural chaos to political and societal unrest. Nations rage, kingdoms totter. These images reflect collective instability, wars, economic collapse, cultural upheaval, and systems of power losing control. This acknowledges that chaos is not only personal but global. Entire structures can shake, entire civilizations can falter. Yet once again, the response is not fear but authority. He utters his voice. The earth melts. This single statement reveals the hierarchy of power. Nations rage loudly, but God speaks softly and decisively. The earth does not negotiate with his voice. It responds immediately. The melting of the earth symbolizes the dissolution of resistance. What appears solid dissolves under divine command. This reveals why storms break before reaching those who trust in God. It is not because storms lack momentum, but because God's word interrupts their trajectory. His voice establishes limits. Chaos is permitted to exist, but not to reign. This distinction is essential. Chaos may be visible, but authority is invisible. The unseen governs the seen. The repetition of the declaration, "The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress," anchors the psalm in covenant identity. The Lord of hosts refers to God as commander of heavenly armies. This emphasizes his authority over spiritual and earthly forces. The God of Jacob refers to his faithfulness to flawed human individuals. Together, these titles reveal a God who is both infinitely powerful and personally committed. This combination dismantles fear at its root. Fear arises when power feels impersonal or absent. Psalm 46 reveals power that is both overwhelming and intimate. God commands armies, yet he also shelters individuals. He governs nations, yet he remains with those who trust him. This duality ensures that no storm is too large for his authority or too personal for his care. Understanding this truth changes how one interprets global instability. When nations rage and systems collapse, fear suggests that chaos is winning. Psalm 46 corrects this narrative. It reveals that global unrest is not evidence of divine absence, but a stage upon which divine sovereignty is displayed. God does not retreat when nations rage. He reigns above them. This does not mean believers are unaffected by global turmoil. They still experience uncertainty, loss, and disruption. But their interpretation differs. They do not view chaos as ultimate. They see it as temporary noise beneath eternal order. This perspective prevents despair from taking root. It anchors hope beyond circumstances. The invitation to "Come, behold the works of the Lord" shifts the focus from fear to observation. Instead of reacting to chaos, the psalmist invites reflection on God's actions. He makes wars cease. He breaks weapons. He burns shields with fire. These actions reveal not just power, but intention. God does not merely restrain chaos, he dismantles it. This dismantling is not always immediate or visible, but it is deliberate. The breaking of weapons symbolizes the removal of tools that sustain conflict. It suggests that chaos cannot perpetuate itself indefinitely. Its resources are finite. Its mechanisms are vulnerable. God intervenes at the structural level, ensuring that storms exhaust themselves. This leads to one of the most profound commands in Scripture: "Be still and know that I am God." This is not a call to passivity. It is a call to surrender false control. Stillness here means ceasing the internal struggle to manage chaos through fear. It is an invitation to recognize divine sovereignty without interference. Knowing God in this context means acknowledging his authority over every storm. It means trusting that he is exalted among the nations and throughout the earth. This knowledge is not intellectual alone, it is relational. It stabilizes the heart when the world destabilizes. When you internalize this truth, storms lose their psychological dominance. They may still occur, but they no longer dictate your inner state. Fear diminishes because understanding increases. You begin to see chaos as constrained, temporary, and ultimately subordinate to divine will. Psalm 46 does not promise a silent world. It promises a sovereign God. It does not deny chaos. It defines its limits. Storms may roar, nations may rage, and mountains may tremble, but none of these forces possess final authority. They exist within boundaries established by God. This is why every storm breaks before reaching you. It encounters divine order before it reaches your core. It may shake the environment, but it cannot overthrow the foundation. That foundation is not circumstance, it is presence. If this teaching is helping you see chaos through the lens of faith rather than fear, now is the right moment to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you stay connected to messages that reveal God's sovereignty, strengthen your inner peace, and remind you that no storm has the final word over your life. Psalm 46 moves deeper than external chaos and collective unrest. It penetrates the inner landscape where fear, anxiety, and spiritual tension truly reside. At this stage of the psalm, the storm is no longer only something that happens around you. It becomes something that presses against your thoughts, your emotions, and your sense of identity. This is where the battle intensifies, because even when external threats are restrained, internal unrest can still destabilize the soul. Psalm 46 addresses this hidden battlefield with precision and authority. The human mind is often the first place where storms attempt to establish dominance. Before destruction manifests outwardly, it whispers inwardly. Fear does not begin with collapse, it begins with interpretation. It suggests that what is shaking will inevitably fall, that what is threatened will certainly be lost, and that what feels uncertain will end in ruin. Psalm 46 confronts this internal narrative by redefining reality from a divine perspective. The declaration, "God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved," carries a meaning far deeper than physical protection. It speaks directly to inner stability. To be unmoved does not mean untouched. It means unovercome. The city may feel the tremors, but it does not collapse. Likewise, the soul may feel pressure, but it does not surrender. This distinction is essential. Many believe that faith should eliminate emotional disturbance. Psalm 46 reveals that faith anchors you so that disturbance does not become destruction. The phrase, "God is in the midst," implies intimacy. God is not stationed at the perimeter, reacting only when danger breaches the walls. He dwells at the center. This center is not geographic, it is spiritual. It represents the core of identity, the place where decisions are formed and meaning is assigned. When God occupies the center, fear loses its authority to define reality. This truth directly challenges the assumption that peace is fragile. Peace rooted in circumstances is indeed fragile because circumstances are unstable. But peace rooted in presence is resilient. It does not depend on predictability. It depends on proximity. The closer the soul remains to the awareness of God's presence, the less power fear has to distort perception. Psalm 46 subtly teaches that fear thrives in isolation. When the soul feels alone, unsupported, or abandoned, fear multiplies. But the awareness that God is present dissolves isolation. Even when others fail, when systems collapse, and when outcomes remain uncertain, the soul anchored in divine presence is never alone. This companionship is not emotional comfort alone, it is authoritative protection. The Psalm's assurance that God will help at the break of dawn introduces an important psychological and spiritual rhythm. Night represents confusion, vulnerability, and heightened fear. In darkness, threats appear larger and solutions seem farther away. Dawn represents clarity, renewal, and restored vision. The promise is not that night will never come, but that it will never have the final word. This speaks directly to seasons of prolonged uncertainty. Many storms do not resolve immediately. They linger. They test endurance. Psalm 46 does not deny this reality. Instead, it reframes waiting as temporary and purposeful. Dawn is inevitable. Even when the night feels endless, it is moving toward resolution. This certainty sustains the soul when emotions waver. The psalmist then returns to the global stage, reminding the reader that inner peace is not dependent on global stability. Nations rage, kingdoms move, but God's voice still governs. This repetition is intentional. It reinforces the idea that fear often arises from a false sense of scale. When global events dominate attention, personal peace feels insignificant. Psalm 46 reverses this imbalance. It reveals that the same authority that governs nations also sustains individual hearts. The statement, "He utters his voice, the earth melts," carries a profound implication. It suggests that resistance dissolves at divine command. Fear often feels immovable because it presents itself as permanent. Psalm 46 exposes fear as fragile. It cannot withstand truth. When God speaks, illusions collapse. What felt solid melts. What seemed unstoppable loses form. This is why stillness becomes central to knowing God. Be still and know that I am God is not a suggestion, it is a directive. Stillness here does not mean inactivity. It means cessation of inner resistance. It means releasing the compulsion to control outcomes through worry. It is an act of trust that acknowledges divine authority over human limitation. Fear thrives on motion. It drives the mind to race, to rehearse worst-case scenarios, to anticipate loss repeatedly. Stillness interrupts this cycle. It creates space for truth to replace imagination. In stillness, the soul remembers who is in control. This remembrance is not passive, it is empowering. Knowing God in this context means recognizing his exaltation beyond circumstances. It is the awareness that he is not competing with chaos, he transcends it. This knowledge recalibrates perspective. Instead of measuring God by the size of the storm is measured by the sovereignty of God. The psalm concludes its central message by reaffirming God's identity as a fortress. A fortress is not merely a shelter, it is a strategic stronghold. It implies structure, defense, and readiness. God is not reacting to chaos, he is positioned against it. This positioning ensures that storms encounter resistance before reaching their target. When the soul internalizes this truth, fear begins to lose its persuasive power. It may still arise, but it no longer dictates decisions. Anxiety may attempt to intrude, but it no longer dominates. The awareness of divine presence establishes an inner boundary that fear cannot cross. This does not mean that believers become indifferent or detached. It means they become grounded. They feel deeply without being overwhelmed. They engage fully without being consumed. This balance is the fruit of trusting God as refuge, not only externally, but internally. Psalm 46 ultimately reveals that the greatest storm is not always the one outside, but the one within. And it assures that even this storm breaks before reaching the core of those who trust in God. His presence intercepts fear at the level of identity. His voice dismantles false narratives. His authority restores stillness where chaos once ruled. This is why the psalm does not end with silence, but with confidence. The repeated declaration, "The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress," is more than reassurance. It is identity affirmation. It reminds the soul who it belongs to and where it stands. If this teaching is helping you find inner stability in the midst of uncertainty, now is the moment to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you ensure continued access to messages that strengthen faith, quiet fear, and remind you that no inner storm is stronger than God's presence within you. As Psalm 46 moves toward its final declarations, it shifts from describing chaos and refuge into something even deeper, the transformation of perception. At this stage, the psalm is no longer simply telling you what God does. It is teaching you how to see. Storms, fear, unrest, and instability all remain present in the narrative, but their meaning changes completely. The focus turns from the power of the storm to the authority that governs it, and from the intensity of fear to the stillness that dismantles it. One of the most misunderstood realities of spiritual life is the belief that faith removes tension. Psalm 46 teaches the opposite. Faith repositions tension. It takes what once dominated the soul and places it beneath divine order. This is why the psalm does not end with the elimination of chaos, but with the command to be still. Stillness is not the absence of movement around you. It is the absence of surrender within you. When the psalm declares, "Be still and know that I am God," it addresses the deepest human impulse, the need to control outcomes. Fear thrives when control feels threatened. The instinctive reaction to chaos is to move faster, think harder, and anticipate more aggressively. Psalm 46 interrupts this impulse. It commands stillness, not as resignation, but as recognition. Stillness becomes an act of trust that acknowledges a higher authority already at work. This stillness is not emotional suppression. It does not deny pain, uncertainty, or risk. Instead, it removes fear's right to rule interpretation. When the soul becomes still, it stops assigning ultimate meaning to temporary events. It stops confusing noise with authority. It stops equating intensity with power. In stillness, perspective returns. The psalm makes it clear that God's sovereignty does not require human assistance. He does not ask you to help him manage chaos. He asks you to know him. This knowing is not intellectual familiarity. It is relational confidence. It is the awareness that God's control is not fragile, delayed, or threatened by circumstances. This truth is difficult for the human mind to accept because it contradicts how survival instincts function. Humans are conditioned to believe that vigilance equals safety, Psalm 46 introduces a higher truth. Trust equals stability. Vigilance without trust leads to exhaustion. Trust without vigilance leads to peace. The psalm does not call for ignorance, but for surrender of false responsibility. When God says he will be exalted among the nations and in the earth, he is not making a future promise alone. He is declaring an eternal reality. His exaltation is not dependent on global recognition. It exists regardless of human acknowledgement. This means that even when the world appears chaotic, his authority has not diminished. It has not been challenged. It has not been delayed. This revelation is essential for enduring prolonged storms. Short trials test patience. Long trials test belief. Over time, fear attempts to rewrite theology. It suggests that God may have lost control, shifted focus, or withdrawn presence. Psalm 46 dismantles this lie by anchoring faith in God's unchanging nature rather than fluctuating outcomes. The repetition of "The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress," is deliberate. Repetition in Scripture reinforces identity when circumstances attempt to erase it. The Lord of hosts emphasizes unlimited power. The God of Jacob emphasizes covenant faithfulness despite human weakness. Together, they assure that protection is not dependent on perfection, strength, or understanding. It is dependent on presence. This is where many believers struggle. They believe refuge is conditional. They assume peace requires worthiness, consistency, or spiritual performance. Psalm 46 refutes this assumption. Jacob was not flawless. He was uncertain, fearful, and often conflicted. Yet God identified himself as Jacob's God. This reveals that refuge is rooted in relationship, not achievement. As this truth settles into the soul, fear begins to lose its leverage. Fear often accuses before it threatens. It questions worth, readiness, and adequacy. Psalm 46 answers these accusations before they escalate. It reminds the believer that God's presence is not earned in crisis. It is revealed in crisis. The stillness God commands is therefore not inactivity, but alignment. It is the realignment of the soul with divine reality. When alignment occurs, panic subsides, not because danger disappears, but because authority is remembered. The soul no longer reacts to chaos as if it were sovereign. This transformation of perception changes how storms are experienced. Instead of interpreting adversity as evidence of impending loss, it becomes evidence of divine engagement. Storms no longer signal abandonment, they highlight protection. The very fact that chaos does not consume you becomes testimony that something greater is at work. Psalm 46 teaches that storms break not because they are weak, but because they encounter limits. These limits are not random, they are intentional. God establishes boundaries that chaos cannot cross. These boundaries may be invisible, but they are absolute. When this truth becomes internalized, anxiety no longer defines anticipation. The future is no longer approached with dread, but with trust. This does not eliminate responsibility or discernment. It eliminates despair. It replaces fear-driven expectation with faith-driven endurance. The psalm ultimately leads the believer to a place of quiet confidence, not loud triumph, not forced optimism. Quiet confidence, rooted in knowing who governs reality. This confidence allows the soul to remain steady while the world fluctuates. Psalm 46 is not a denial of suffering. It is a revelation of supremacy. It does not minimize storms. It positions them. It does not silence chaos by force. It renders it powerless through truth. This is why every storm breaks before reaching you. It is intercepted not by chance, but by sovereignty. It is restrained not by luck, but by presence. The soul that abides in this truth becomes unshakable, not because it avoids storms, but because it knows who stands between it and destruction. If this message is helping you see your trials through a deeper spiritual lens and strengthening your trust in God's authority, Take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you stay connected to teachings that restore perspective, build endurance, and remind you that no storm can override God's presence in your life. Psalm 46 reaches its fullest expression not by introducing a new promise, but by sealing everything it has already revealed into lived reality. At this point, the psalm is no longer only something to be read or understood, it becomes something to be inhabited. The refuge described is not theoretical. The stillness commanded is not abstract. The sovereignty proclaimed is not distant. This final movement of the psalm draws all prior truths into one defining conclusion. When God is truly known as refuge, storms lose the power to shape destiny. One of the most profound misunderstandings about divine protection is the belief that it operates only at moments of visible danger. Psalm 46 dismantles this idea completely. Protection is not merely what happens when things nearly collapse. It is what prevents collapse from ever reaching its intended end. Many storms never reveal their full force because they are intercepted long before their objective is achieved. What feels like survival is often prevention disguised as endurance. This means that much of God's work remains unseen. The storms you notice are not the most dangerous ones. The most destructive forces are often those you never encounter because they were restrained before they could manifest. Psalm 46 reveals a God who does not only rescue after damage, but who restrains before devastation. This shifts faith from reactive gratitude to continual trust. The repeated affirmation that the Lord of hosts is with us becomes especially significant here. Hosts refers to armies, not symbols. It conveys readiness, coordination, and authority. God is not passively observing the movement of chaos. He commands forces that actively govern outcomes. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is spiritual reality expressed in language humans can grasp. Yet the psalm balances this overwhelming power with intimacy by identifying God as the God of Jacob. Jacob represents vulnerability, struggle, and transformation. He was not confident by nature. He wrestled, feared, doubted, and fled. And yet God bound his name to Jacob's. This means that divine refuge is not reserved for the fearless, the flawless, or the unwavering. It is extended to those who wrestle and still remain. This understanding liberates the soul from the pressure to maintain perfect faith. Many believers experience fear not because they doubt God, but because they doubt themselves. They worry that fear disqualifies them from protection. Psalm 46 corrects this fear by revealing that refuge is not dependent on emotional consistency. It is rooted in covenant presence. As this truth settles, the soul begins to experience a deeper kind of peace. Not relief because circumstances improve, but peace because identity stabilizes. When identity is anchored in God's presence, storms lose their ability to redefine you. You are no longer someone at risk of collapse. You are someone preserved through conflict. Psalm 46 also teaches that storms are not random interruptions to life. They exist within a framework of purpose. This does not mean God causes every storm, but it does mean he governs their outcome. Chaos does not get the final edit on your story. It may shape chapters, but it does not write conclusions. This realization changes how endurance is experienced. Endurance is no longer passive suffering. It becomes active trust. Waiting is no longer empty delay. It becomes alignment with timing beyond human perception. What feels like stagnation is often stabilization in progress. The psalm's emphasis on stillness reaches its deepest meaning here. Stillness is no longer just a response to fear. It becomes a way of being. It is the posture of a soul that no longer reacts to every tremor as a threat. Stillness is cultivated when trust becomes instinctive rather than forced. This does not eliminate emotion, it orders it. Fear may still arise, but it no longer commands behavior. Anxiety may still whisper, but it no longer narrates reality. The soul learns to listen beyond noise. Psalm 46 ultimately teaches that refuge is not escapism. It is engagement from a position of security. God does not remove you from the world's instability. He establishes you within it. This allows you to live fully without being consumed by fear of loss. The storms that once threatened to undo you become testimonies of restraint. You begin to recognize patterns of preservation that were invisible before, moments where things could have gone further, deeper, or darker, but did not. This awareness fosters gratitude not just for what happened, but for what was prevented. This is the quiet miracle of Psalm 46. It does not promise dramatic rescues every time. It promises enduring presence always, and presence changes everything. When you know that God is with you, you stop measuring safety by circumstances and start measuring it by alignment. You stop asking whether the storm is strong and start remembering who stands in front of it. You stop bracing for collapse and start resting in sovereignty. The psalm closes not with silence, but with certainty. The repeated declaration of God as fortress is the final anchor. A fortress does not chase storms away. It stands until storms exhaust themselves. It does not panic when attacked. It was built for resistance. Psalm 46 invites you to live from within that fortress. Not occasionally, but continually. Not only when fear rises, but before it forms. This is the life of faith that is steady, not fragile. Grounded, not reactive. A life where storms may come, but they do not arrive with authority. This is why every storm breaks before reaching you. Not because life is gentle, but because God is faithful. Not because danger disappears, but because it is restrained. Not because fear is absent, but because it is outmatched. If this final teaching has strengthened your trust, deepened your faith, and helped you see your life through the lens of divine protection, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you stay connected to messages that remind you who your refuge is, where your strength comes from, and why no storm will ever have the final word over your life.